The forest was dense, darker than I ever thought it could be. The air felt heavy, and the faint rustling of leaves seemed unnaturally loud. I had always loved camping trips, especially with my family. But this time, something felt wrong from the start. It was supposed to be a fun weekend in Oregon's vast wilderness. But now I was alone, lost, and terrified. It all began innocently enough. Mom and Dad were setting up the tent, and I, being the curious 10-year-old I was, decided to explore nearby. I spotted a rabbit, its fluffy white tail bouncing as it hopped into the underbrush. I couldn't resist. I followed it deeper into the woods, thinking I'd return in just a minute. But the rabbit disappeared, and when I turned around, nothing looked familiar. The sun hung low, its golden light filtering through the trees, casting long shadows. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest seemed to twist and shift around me. Panic set in as I called out for Mom and Dad. My voice echoed back, thin and weak, swallowed by the endless expanse of trees. I kept walking, hoping to find a path or hear a familiar sound. Instead, I noticed something odd: footprints. They were too large to belong to my parents and looked fresh, pressed deep into the soft earth. My heart raced. Relief washed over me momentarily. Someone else is here, I thought, and I followed the prints without hesitation. But as I walked, the air grew colder. The forest became eerily quiet. Even the birds stopped singing. The footprints led me to a clearing where the ground was scattered with shredded pieces of fabric and something dark and sticky. I crouched down to inspect it. Blood. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back, realizing the fabric was from a shirt, small enough to belong to someone my age. Fear gripped me, but curiosity pushed me forward. I followed the trail of blood, which led deeper into the forest. The trees here were gnarled and ancient, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the forest itself didn't want me there. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I clutched my small flashlight tightly, even though its weak beam barely pierced the growing darkness. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the distance. It was tall, cloaked in shadows, and motionless. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond but turned its head slightly as if acknowledging my presence. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. The figure began to move, not walking but gliding silently between the trees. I turned and ran, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned everything else. Branches clawed at my face and arms as I pushed through the underbrush. I didn't stop until I stumbled and fell into another clearing. There, in the center, was an old wooden shack. It looked abandoned, its windows shattered, and its door hanging ajar. Desperation overrode my fear, and I hurried inside, hoping for safety. The shack was cold and smelled of decay. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and the walls were covered in strange carvings, symbols I didn't recognize. A single, flickering lantern hung from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and shift. In the corner of the room lay a pile of bones, too small to belong to an animal. I gagged, backing away until my foot hit something metallic, a trap, rusted and stained. I realized then that this place wasn't abandoned. Someone had been here, someone who hunted. A chill ran down my spine as I heard a faint sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. I turned towards the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the shack. The whisper grew louder, incomprehensible but filled with malice. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching my flashlight as the lantern flickered and died. Darkness enveloped me, and in that suffocating blackness, I heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. My hands fumbled for the flashlight, and when I managed to turn it on, its beam landed on the doorway. The figure stood there, now fully visible. It wore a patchwork cloak made of animal hides and scraps of fabric, and its face was obscured by a mask made of bone. The eyes behind the mask glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire. It tilted its head, as if studying me, and raised one hand, pointing directly at me. "Stay away!" I screamed, but my voice was barely a whisper. The figure took a step forward, and I bolted for the window. I didn't care about the shards of glass that cut into my skin as I climbed through. I just needed to escape. I hit the ground running, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand, casting fleeting glimpses of the forest around me. The chase felt endless. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps unnaturally heavy, yet it never seemed to falter. My lungs burned, and tears streamed down my face as I stumbled through the trees. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw a light in the distance. It was faint but unmistakable, a campfire. I ran towards it, my last shred of hope driving me forward. The fire was surrounded by figures, but these were different. They wore uniforms, park rangers. I burst into the clearing, collapsing at their feet, sobbing uncontrollably. They surrounded me, their voices calm and reassuring, but I couldn't form the words to explain what had happened. When I finally managed to speak, they exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, an older man with a weathered face, knelt beside me and said, "You're lucky, kid. This forest has a dark history. People have gone missing here for years. Some say it's the work of a man who disappeared decades ago. They call him the Shadow Hunter. Others think it's something worse." I told them about the figure, the shack, and the glowing eyes. They searched the area but found no trace of the shack or the figure. The only thing they discovered was my trail of bloody footprints leading back to the clearing. They said it was a miracle I'd survived, but I knew the truth. The forest had let me go, but it wasn't done with me. Even now, years later, I can still feel its presence. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the faint rustling of leaves and the slow, deliberate footsteps of something that should not exist. And I know, deep down, that one day it will come back for me.